Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Circle of Fellows for July 2022. I am Shell Holtz, and I will be moderating this panel today. Just by way of some introduction, I am Senior Director of Communications at Webcor, which is a commercial general contractor and builder headquartered in San Francisco. And I'm coming to you from the San Francisco East Bay in Concord, California. And today, and next month for that matter, we're going to be tackling a big question and perhaps a confounding one to people who have worked in communications for any length of time. What is communication? What isn't communication? I think we can address that from any number of angles, general definitions, right down to what we should and shouldn't be doing if communication is our job in an organization. And I can't think of four better people to talk about this, well, except of course for the four we'll have next month, than the four that I have with me today. And I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves. And after that, we will jump into this topic and start with you, Ned.
Thanks, Shell, and welcome everybody. I'm Ned Lundquist, IABC Fellow. I am coming to you from Springfield, Virginia, and I have my own company called Echo Bridge, which is Echo is a message that repeats itself, and Bridge is something that connects. And I do tactical content generation, not so much the strategic stuff, because I presume my clients have a strategy, but I'm usually wrong about that.
See what happens when you assume, right?
Yeah.
Neil.
Hi, everybody. Neil Griffiths. I'm from the UK, based out of a little place called Saffron Walden, about an hour away from London. In my day job, I am global head of DE&I for the world's largest sustainability consultancy. And prior to that, I've spent the better part of 20 years in a variety of internal and external communication roles. I'll pass on to the rest.
Okay, that's fine. Jennifer, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, where it's a lovely sunny day and feels like summer. I am chief storyteller with my own consulting agency, Forwards Communication, and I work with a variety of clients on strategic storytelling initiatives and opportunities. I also teach as an adjunct professor at the Sauder School of Business here at UBC. And I've been involved with the IABC for a long time and jumping into chair of the Global Ethics Committee this coming year. I'm really looking forward to that work.
Oh, that's outstanding.
Whoa.
I don't think I knew that.
I didn't either.
You were taking on that role. Congratulations. That goes way back. I remember when Wilma Matthews had that job.
Oh, yes.
And John, I imagine it feels like summer where you are too.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm John Clemens. I am in very muggy North Carolina, and I am a PR and communications consultant, and I am also an adjunct professor for the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and Loyola University in New Orleans. Welcome.
Outstanding. So we have the practitioner side and the academic side all rolled up into two of our panelists today. Just to let those of you who are watching in real time know that if you have a question or an observation or a comment or an experience that you'd like to share, just click that button in YouTube and I will see that and I will be able to share that right on screen with the panel and help you can help drive this conversation. Those are always great conversations when the people who are watching participate like that. But let's start off with definitions of communication. I spent 21 years as a consultant. I'm almost 5 years now at Webcor, and I have found it necessary to provide people with a sort of a very broad, overarching definition of communication. And there are two that I use. One is an exchange of knowledge and information, because an exchange is a two-way process. And if you're just sending information, that's messaging. I don't perceive that as communicating. The other comes from a journal that I was reading of an early American explorer from France. I kind of like early American history. And he talked about coming to the place where one river communicated with another. And I said, isn't that an interesting use of that word? It wasn't one I had heard before at that point. And I looked it up, and lo and behold, the root of that is to make common. So basically, communication is when you get people on the same page, when two entities converge and come to a common understanding. That's the result of communication. What are the definitions you like? And anybody can jump right in and share your thoughts.
Let me go with a couple of nautical definitions. When we talk about shipping routes, we talk about the sea lines of communication. So if you have a very busy shipping route between Asia, let's say, and the West Coast of North America, that's a sea line of communication because the commerce is going back and forth. Another nautical definition might be when you have a leak in a ship, like a hole in the side of the ship. Maybe you hit a some kind of obstruction, or you got struck by a torpedo or something. Then you have the water outside the ship is flooding and filling up with the water, which is now inside the ship, and that's considered free communication. So the water's going in and out. That's a bad thing, by the way, to have water going in and out of your ship like that. But that gets the exact same description you had, Shell, of the water becoming common.
Well, Shell, I think you are spot on. I think if there is not an exchange or two-way communications, or with the messaging that is distributed, I don't think it's communication. And that's what we're talking about, what is and isn't. And I definitely think there has to be a sender and a receiver. And that cycle continues throughout a project or a program or some type of endeavor, organizational endeavor. So I fully agree with you. I don't have any more to add, but I just wanted to sound in that, yes, I think you're correct.
I appreciate that agreement.
I was going to add in a sort of a filter through my lens as a storytelling evangelist that when we look at the ways historically that communication has evolved, that powerful element of storytelling that brings in the senses, that brings in engagement of different parts of our brain than just straight one-way communications or communications that doesn't engage on a different level. I would sort of pose the probably somewhat arguable point that communications without storytelling is not fully engaged communications.
It raises an interesting point, Jennifer, the distinction between organizational communication and other forms of communication, because I have certainly read books that communicated with me, even though the author of the book never heard back from me. So there is that distinction that I think it's important to make. So when in a communication role in an organization, we get a call from somebody who says, I need a brochure or I need a video. Is that necessarily communication? Is that something we should be doing?
I'll jump in on that one. I mean, I'd love to hear everybody's stories of those types of requests, because I suspect that we've all got them from our time working with various stakeholders. And I'd perhaps notorious on these recordings for giving flaky answers like "it depends," but I think it probably
answer to anything.
I think it probably does depend. If somebody's coming to you and saying, I need a video, and yet they've thought all that through, and of course the video is a sensible choice for what it is that they're trying to achieve, then maybe yes. If they just want the video because before we were recording, Ned was talking about a scenario where, we've got the budget, so let's do it. Let's do one. Then there's questions around that. But it sort of comes back to that, that the definition piece, doesn't it? And I think it's always changing. So is this communication? Is that not communication? I think we continue to evolve what we understand to be communication, and I think that's why this question is always so relevant.
And just to add on to what Neil said, I think, and I know my response internally with clients now, and when I was working for corporations, if they say I need a video, my question back is, so tell me, why do you need a video? Because I've found that executives, many of them really don't understand public relations. I had one say to me at a time, I need an internal news release. And I just looked at him like, okay, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about, and I'll walk him through it. But there's always the question of why. Why do you need a brochure? Why do you need a video? And help them understand that there are other tactical approaches, if one is needed at all, that you should be looking at, not necessarily the first thing that comes to your mind because you're familiar with it. And I think our role as professional communicators is to educate our audiences and our executives and our employees about effective communication and what that looks like. And that can take many forms. It is not always that video.
So sometimes they'll come through and say, we've got the money, we want the video. And they actually have a good reason to communicate. They actually know who their audience is. But to add on to what you were saying, John, when you talk them through what they're really trying to achieve and how you would be able to create a strategic communication plan that has a starting point and then a desired endpoint, maybe you find that the video is not the best way to get there. Maybe
Right.
It's a combination of town hall meetings and brochures. There are many different ways. So you have to find the one that's most effective for the audience and is best able to communicate the message. And then you need to measure to find out if you succeeded. Otherwise, you have no idea if you've wasted your money or not.
And sorry, Ned, just to put a PS on what you just said, measurement, obviously, I mean, we're all on side with that, but we need that measurement so that the next time someone comes and asks us for a video, either at that organization or another, we can include in that, you know what, with these particular audience elements, we find that, yes, that is a successful channel based on all the other strategic inputs, or it's not.
And if the client doesn't consider all those factors, then clearly it isn't communication. So just to play up the title, that isn't communication if we don't walk them through that process.
I had a client once, and I had nothing to do with this. It was in place when I got there, but their intranet homepage for the internal communications department was essentially an intake form that said, who are you trying to communicate with and what do you want from them? What are your deadlines? So they were looking for objectives and other information that would allow them to go back and say, this is the best way to communicate before they even had an opportunity to say, I want a brochure or I want a video or whatever tactic they were looking at. But does it need to be instigated in the communication department to be communication?
No, of course not. I mean, the process of communication is universal, right? And every person in an organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, government, whatever, you have to use the communication process every day in everything you do. If you're going to try to communicate to influence the entire organization, whether it's to adopt a new healthcare program or to sign up for the new go out and purchase something or attend an event, all those things have some desired result, and then you can figure out the best way to get that message to them. It's almost a form of marketing, but in that case, you're not selling something. You're trying to motivate people to adopt a certain behavior. And that gets into the whole question of, is communications marketing, or is marketing and PR communications? And that, I guess, depends on where you sit. But I certainly think that communication, because it is such an overarching process, everything else, whether that process is to sell something, is a subset of communication. So I would say marketing, subset of communication.
PR, subset of communication.
Subset of communication.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Does everybody else feel that way? Because I have certainly worked with organizations and talked with other people who say, no, PR is the overarching and everything rolls up to that. Or marketing is the overarching umbrella and everything falls under that. How do you all feel?
Quite honestly, I don't know if I'm right, but I do believe it depends on the organization that you work for, the company you work for, the client company, and the culture of that company. I mean, that dictates who is leading in terms of communication. So I agree with you and you, Shell, and you, Ed, but again, that varies depending on where you're working or who you're working for. My 2 cents.
So, John, I would counter that with sort of along the lines of what we were talking about in terms of communication as a function, as an umbrella function, and suggest that those functions, PR, marketing, I would include change management, which is a bit of a somewhat newer function in many organizations. And Neil, I'd love to hear your perspective on DE&I communication aspects, but I would argue that all of that falls under the umbrella of communications as a function. It shows up differently in different organizations. And when we were back and forth leading up to this session, I was actually thinking a lot about some of the clients I work with who might come and ask for a video, and what it turns out to be is that we're in fact when we dive deeper with those questions that we know to ask, in fact there's an underlying business challenge that needs to be addressed, and that communication professionals, when we're showing up in the best ways that we can and asking those questions that the IABC and other frameworks give us, that in fact we're sometimes being called on to help organizations solve business challenges that sometimes we can help with through the channels and understandings and our understanding of audiences that we have. And other times, in fact, it's about pushing back and saying, you know what, that's a business process decision that shouldn't actually fall to a communications professional kind of thing.
I had a contracting officer contact me, a government contracting officer, and he said, I need a third bidder for a communications plan. We've got a program that needs a communications plan. Maybe you could bid on it. And I said, well, what's the business plan? And he said, what? And I said, what is the communication plan supporting? And he goes, what? So clearly, the communication plan does not exist in and of itself.
Right.
The plan is part of a strategy. This communication strategy supports the business plan and the business strategy. And if you don't know that, then communication is meaningless. It has no direction.
Before we go on, we do have an observation. This comes from our fellow, Alice Brink. Hi, Alice. Alice says, I talked with someone at a conference who made a distinction between communication and change management, because communication is about sending messages and change management involves people in the process. Jennifer, since you've raised change management, you have any thoughts on that?
Can you put it back up, Shell, or
Sure.
raise it again?
There it is.
Communication. I would not agree with the person you spoke to at conference, Alice, because I think both are about both.
Right.
And communications absolutely needs to involve people in the process. To your point, to your example earlier, Shell, when I read a book, I am taking in information without a two-way interchange. but I wouldn't necessarily call that communication. That's hopefully good writing, education, etc. So the change management professionals I've worked with, whom I consider an essential partner to communication professionals in our new workplace, would all agree that that in both cases we need to involve our audiences, the sender, and understanding of the sender and receiver where it comes to change and communications.
You can't change without communicating, period. And that gets into the whole thing about communication not being just a marketing thing, because change is not selling something. Change is influencing behavior, and that starts with awareness, leads to understanding, eventually conviction, and ultimately behavior. That's part of that communications continuum, and nothing is bought or sold necessarily.
Well, to the second part of what Alice sent, where people need to be involved in the process, I think the communication piece is implied, but when there's a change management program or process, it's going to take a period of time. And what I thought Alice meant by people is you need an executive champion for that project to help push it through. You need to be meeting with the next level of executives to get their buy-in, to make sure they understand what's happening. You need to get employees or others involved so they understand why this is happening, the WIFM, that storytelling piece Jennifer is talking about. So I read it as there are stages in change management where specific people need to be involved to ensure that it's successful at the end of the day. That's the way I interpreted that.
And it's on the screen, but for those who listen later on the podcast, I'll just point out that Alice shared that she didn't agree with that observation from that person at conference either. Is strategic planning required for a communication to be communication? I mean, does it have to be strategic?
If it's going to be a major business objective, and you want to apply a communication effort to support that, then you have to not only plan, you have to know where you're starting from. And that's one of the weakest things about communication efforts, is that they don't even know where they're starting from. And it's really hard to figure out where you want to go if you don't know where you are to start with.
And just to go back to something else that you talked about earlier, Ned, I feel like there's often an assumption that communication can fix projects that are really broken, and actually that communication ends up being held accountable or responsible for the failure of a really rotten project. I mean, I've worked on campaigns where the kind of questions I've been asking have exposed serious flaws in the deployment of an initiative in an organization. And it's only because I've been seeking to make the communication impactful, effective, drive the outcomes that we're looking for, that it's really sort of seriously exposed some significant issues. So communication, for me, communication definitely is the silver bullet, if you will, the magic solution to fix all things that are really not right in the first place.
That raises an interesting question, Neil, that I was going to bring up. Very, very much aligned with that is communication always a solution to issues or challenges or problems or bad reputations or serious mistakes that an organization has made? You said it's not a silver bullet. Can it always be counted on to fix things that have gone wrong? And I remember Dean Landesh from a longtime IABC member once complaining that communications was like the sheriff that was brought in to clean up the town after all of the problems had taken place. Can it?
Well, it's part of any kind of business process, and if trying to repair a business that's suffering, or an organization that's got issues, communication is part of the solution.
Yeah, and going on with what Ned said, I think it's an integral part of the process of any situation. And my personal belief is nothing happens without communication. Absolutely nothing. And so I think it is a part of reputation management, crisis communications. It's part of all of that. Even making announcements, even going to the supermarket, there's communication to guide us on what we need to do. I totally am in full belief that nothing happens without communications.
And it's always a good time to communicate.
So to answer your question, Shell, no, I don't think communications can single-handedly solve a business issue. I think it can help. And I think, I think we're all building on each other here, not surprisingly. I think it can help through the questions we ask. We can sometimes help get further along to the root of the problem, which might help a group, including those involved more embedded in the business process, solve some things that communications can't. But single-handedly, no, we're not that magic solution. And as for the grocery store, John, the other day I went to Costco with my husband. Normally we would go separately. He's the kind of person who's in and out with his 4 items and home again. I'm wandering the aisles and I've got a path I like to go. And it turns out he goes in a completely different direction and he parks in the wrong place. And he didn't let me go down the book aisle. And
he's a hunter. You're a gatherer.
Exactly. But to your point,
no samples?
No samples, nothing. He's like, come
What's
on,
the point?
go. And I'm like, aren't we stopping for wings? I mean, this is an experience. Not to mention the price tag on it now. I wanted this to be have some good full entertainment value. But it was a hilarious example of communication because I'm like, why are you going that way? No, I go this way. And then Costco has, wants you to go a whole different way. But that comes up in all sorts of things in life, doesn't it?
Yes.
I think, Shel, there's something interesting behind your question as well in terms of, I sensed a hint of, is it always a good idea to communicate? And are there times when we perhaps shouldn't? Was there something like that in your line of questioning?
No, but I'll take it. That's
okay. All right.
That's a very interesting point to make and top of mind for me lately.
I read far too much into your question then, evidently, but and I actually go back to something that you mentioned, Jennifer, earlier about DE&I communication, because I think there's a temptation to always have a view, and I think that stakeholders, internal and external, definitely expect organizations to have a line and a position on things that matter to those stakeholders. But I don't know that it's always authentic to communicate on all issues, quite honestly. And I think we've seen certain organizations getting into trouble when they've waded into topics and conversations that they don't really have a credible position to be in. So I don't know that it's always the right idea to communicate. But one thing I know is a truth is that communicating nothing is communicating something.
I was about to ask exactly that. What kind of message does it send when you opt not to communicate something? And we have a great example here in the U.S. Recently, and I swear I don't want to get into the political side of this, strictly the communication angle, and that is the Supreme Court decision ending the constitutional right to an abortion. There have been companies that have waded into this in a big way. There have been companies that merely came out and said, our benefits will cover the ability for our employees to travel out of state if they need to for these procedures. And there are companies that opted to say nothing or very, very little. There were a lot of companies internally that simply said our employees represent a broad range of views on this, and we respect everybody's views, period. They're all communicating the same issue to broadly the same audiences. What differentiates them, and which of these are communication, and which ones are communicating regardless of the organization's hopes that they wouldn't have to?
I mean, really interesting. I'll jump in just because it's right in my space, I guess. And we communicated internally only on the topic, but we did so because the vacuum it gets filled, right? And we need to let people know that they're supported, that we've got we're looking into it. It's a hugely complex issue in terms of the systems behind the healthcare provisions and also the legal implications of actually having a view, given that so much is uncertain in that particular landscape. And I think, politics aside, it has had an impact on so many people, not just in the US. And I think it's on a topic like that, it's really important for your stakeholders, internal and external, to know where you are at on it, to be quite honest. And if you don't, then I just think that the vacuum takes over, and that just leads to all sorts of issues. So you don't have to have a hugely evolved position on it, but you need one. You need to have a position, and that needs to be known.
John,
I don't know. I've read articles that some major corporations, when Roe versus Wade, the decision came out, a number of these corporations are run by men, and they don't know what to do with this. But our role as professional communicators is to provide all of the resources to them, give them points of view, and then to the point you made, Shell, we support all opinions about this decision, but you're not making a stand, because I think some CEOs and presidents are just drop dead scared to say anything because it may come back at them. You have a situation like the George Floyd murder. A number of companies didn't say anything, but think of the impact that has on minority employees who are wondering, my company doesn't care, they're not going to say anything. What does that say when they're, to Neil's point, when you're not communicating? That means my company condones what happened. So it really depends on the situation. I think sometimes it may be best to be silent because you are potentially stepping into a minefield. But if I were, in the George Floyd situation, yes, I think a company should say something. In Roe versus Wade, I don't know. Quite honestly, I don't know. And this discussion has been going on LinkedIn. It's going on in PRSA. It's going on in IABC. And I have not seen one definitive statement or direction or guidance on yes or no.
But couldn't you deal with
this to be really clear,
not as a social issue necessarily, but for the employees, for your internal audience, let them know that you're still going to support them in terms of their healthcare choices or something like that. So you're not taking a position, but you are informing your key audience so they don't have to wonder what's going to happen to them.
Ned, you've said exactly what I meant. That's exactly what I meant.
But ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind that whatever is said internally is going to go externally. Somebody is going to pick it up, and you're going to have to be ready to respond to that. There
Which
is
is
no internal only
No,
message.
you're right.
Yeah, John Gerstner, when he, not our John Gerstner, the one who, or Lou Gerstner, he was the head of IBM, said that if you don't want it to appear on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, don't say it in our boardroom out loud. That's how easy it is for things to get outside. But John, based on your external, PR experience, I wanted to, let's take this out of the realm of societal issues and politically fraught issues and just talk about something business focused. I worked for an organization that was going to lay off 10% of its headquarters staff, and they wanted to keep this a secret until the morning of the layoff and not do any communication, specifically because they wanted to keep it out of the press. And my argument was, first of all, this is going to be very demoralizing to the employees who are not among that 10%, that they're hearing about this from their colleagues who are cleaning out their desks as a security person looms over them. But if you think that laying off 10% of the headquarters staff in a metropolis the size of Los Angeles is going to escape the notice of the media, that's just delusional. So when this type of thing comes up, what is communication? I mean, I was able to convince them to do a desk drop. This was in the mid 80s, so there were no email messages or digital communication, but a desk drop. So when they came in that morning, they learned that this was going to be happening. When it did get covered in the press, it quoted that desk drop, which meant that it was our message getting into the press rather than that of a disgruntled employee who had just been terminated or somebody who had left earlier saying, yeah, that's just the way this company operates, right? Mm-hmm. So, John, I mean, from that external PR media relations perspective, what is communication and what isn't in this type of situation?
And in the situation you mentioned, the layoff?
Yeah, that type of thing, a corporate internal matter that is going to be of interest externally.
I've worked on a layoff situation at a major retailer, and the way we staged it was to ensure that all of the managers were trained or had their script on what they were going to say to those affected employees. But there was also guidance on, if you are contacted by the media, it should be coming to me or some of my counterparts in communications, because the possibility of it getting out is very high. But we were very sensitive to informing the affected employees just before the announcement. This was all staged. It's almost like kind of a mini change management process. You plan every stage along the way to ensure there are hopefully no mistakes. These employees were shown compassion. They were told what their options are. It wasn't just you're fired. So I'd like to think that if a story got out, the reporter would be asking, are they doing anything for you? What's going to happen when you leave the job? That they would have information to say, well, they're offering X, Y, Z, but then the announcement would come out and spell all of that out. So we were looking internally and the potential for this going external with the right messages, with understanding from our employees. And fortunately, nothing, it was reported, but it wasn't negative. It's rather a matter of fact that this company is laying off employees.
There are going to be times when you've got classified information you can't divulge, or something is in litigation or being investigated. So, but you still have to say something. You can't just stare at people. You have to have some response. And I look at people who, you see a video of someone in a deposition and they just keep saying, I take the fifth, I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate myself. After a while, you think a non-answer like that is definitely saying something. You draw a conclusion that, well, they wouldn't say that if they didn't have something incriminating to worry about. So I think that you always need to have something at least ready to go. Like John, you had that was well planned out, and each contingency was you were loaded for. You're all ready to go.
And just to jump in, I mean, I let's not sound too old, folks. When we think about the younger generations coming into the workforce, really some of the more traditional channels we're talking about are somewhat irrelevant. Social media has changed the landscape forever. And so even the idea of internal versus external. And when I teach my third year business students, business communications, they haven't worked in organizations yet, so they don't entirely understand internal versus external. But their worlds are so blended. The idea of life and work and personal and public is so blended in the realm of social media that, to your point, Shell, something not even as dramatic as something said in the boardroom ends up on the front page of the Wall Street News, but it's more that that something said in the elevator is just as likely to end up on TikTok by the end of the day.
So TikTok is now a source of news for lots of people, right?
It's even more.
When I poll my students, they list the top sources for news are YouTube, TikTok, and not Snapchat, actually, YouTube and TikTok.
Interestingly, I just saw data that said among Gen Z, 40% are using TikTok and Instagram for search instead of Google.
Yeah.
They're just not even going to Google to search, which raises an interesting thought, another question, and that's around tactics for communication. We want to get a message out. We want to engage with an audience, but they have to find us first. So we practice search engine optimization so that our stuff on Google rises to the top. Is SEO communication? Is that kind of tactic communication, or is that just part of the process of, preparing to communicate?
I think that's a method of maybe optimizing your communication, your outreach, or whatever. But
means to an end.
It's not communication in and of itself, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Shell? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Ned. It's a means to an end. It's a way to optimize discovery so that you are able to communicate. I think it's important for communicators to engage in this, but it's laying the groundwork for communication. It's not communication in and of itself, which does suggest that there is work that we have to do as communicators that is not in and of itself communication.
And you're all right in that the technology has changed the medium, the media that we use, and the methodology. But the process hasn't changed. It's still having a message, having a way to get the message across, knowing who you're communicating with, getting that message to them, making sure they've received it and understand it, and you hear back from them. And whether you're doing that with a lithograph and a blue pencil and an X-Acto knife and a wax machine, or you're doing it with social media in a digital world, it's still a process of communicating. I mean, I'm old school. I got the newspaper right here. I still love this. I still love the smell of a print shop.
I still get a daily newspaper too. But is it communicate? Oh, before I ask this question, with about 15 minutes left, I just want to appeal to those of you watching live to please share your questions, your thoughts, your observations. I know there are more of you than just Alice. So anything you would like to hear about from the panel, please just use YouTube to share that, and we'll get it across. I'm not sure what Mirko means here with wash hands, but
Okay.
I'm clean.
Mine too.
Mine too.
Is it communication if you don't want something from the other party that you're communicating with? I've seen all kinds of communication models.
What?
That's applause. Oh, for the newsprint lovers. That's it. Wash your hands to get the
Ah.
newsprint off. And I
Okay.
do, yeah. Uh, the models I've seen always culminate with a change of behavior or a reinforcement of behavior, a change in what you believe or a reinforcement in what you believe. Is that necessary for it to be communication, that you're looking for something from the other party you're communicating with?
That's
Well,
an
if
interesting
you can
question.
It's a really
communicate,
good one.
I
Yeah.
suppose you can communicate without a purpose. Sure, my wife says I do that all the time.
That's an interesting question, Shell. But I think that there is a part of communication that is just awareness, where you are not expecting a return or a response, but you are just providing information to create awareness. So no, I guess I don't believe that there has to be an action, a change of belief. It's just, you trying to use something very simple. I can't even think of an example right now.
I've got one. What about a focus group? Our colleague Mark Schumann had a job involving culture in the organization he worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And he conducted regular focus groups with volunteers to participate in this program, basically to tell him what was going on so that he could turn around and report that to the leaders of the organization, saying, here's what people are thinking and talking about and feeling that probably rates your action or your understanding. So when you're sitting in that focus group, not looking for change or belief or attitude from the people who are participating, it's still give and take, right? Sender and receiver, with that
Mm-hmm.
role changing depending on whether it's the facilitator talking or a participant. Is that
sounds like a
communication?
technique. It's a technique of message testing. So it's part of the process, but it's not the process.
I mean, if we go into every situation with an eye to, with an assessment of what's the action or reaction we're looking for as communication professionals, no reaction can be a reaction, right? It's the same as an organization choosing to not put out messaging. I've learned a lot. Again, I keep coming back to the change management professionals I've worked with, and I've learned a lot from in terms of the processes that discipline uses. So one of the models used frequently is the acronym is ADKAR. Many of you probably heard it. Stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So to your point about awareness, John, that's the first step in moving people along an arc of change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And communication has a powerful role in every single one of those steps. But awareness is a first step, and so there may not be any action at that point.
Right. Exactly.
I think to some extent, Shell, we're probably the wrong crowd to be answering that type of question, right? Because we know what great communication can do for organizations and for people within them and outside of them. And I think we're kind of wired a certain way in that regard. I can't really think of a scenario where we're not seeking to accomplish something. I even see awareness as some kind of
agree.
Sure.
reaction, to use Jennifer's words. So
And
maybe we're the wrong ones to answer it.
It may not be immediate, but you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
But my wife worked in advertising, and she was aware of these ad directors that would have these competitions, and they would have these really clever ads or commercials. And you've seen them on YouTube videos about some of these great commercials. But one of the factors in picking the best ads, whether it's print or for motion media, It had nothing to do with how successful they were in selling the product. So what's creative, what's wonderful, what gets your attention, what moves you isn't necessarily what motivates you to buy something. So in advertising, what's really glitzy doesn't necessarily sell.
But it has to get your attention first, right? I mean, if it doesn't get your attention, you're not going to move up that pyramid.
True.
But what they're trying to do is get the attention of other ad directors and creative directors. And that's a little bit different than the average person who's going to be buying a product.
Is it communication if you aren't listening?
No.
No,
There's no
it's not.
receiver. There's no receiver.
If you're the sender and there is a receiver on the other end, but you're not listening as the sender, is that communication?
Also,
man,
no.
I thought
You've broken the process. You've interrupted the messaging and receiving.
Okay, I'm going to stir the pot again. Who among us has not had a leader or a colleague approach us and say, I need a video? In my case, I've done a couple of corporate history books. And despite my best efforts in diving into and dissecting and looking for more of a strategy, I'm going to be honest, and a few of those projects have been because the CEO wanted it, because and that might be ego driven, it might be personal brand driven, it might be a deeper organizational issue that I can't get to. But there are those occasions when the business outcome has more to do with personal outcomes than broader strategic initiatives and stakeholder return on investment, et cetera. And again, let's be honest, in the day-to-day work of many communication professionals, that's what they're faced with.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And of course, we're asked all the time to send out a message like, be sure to complete your benefits enrollment by a specific date, or don't forget the company picnic is this coming Sunday.
Yes.
Are those communications, or are those just announcements and messaging? I mean, do they fit in that category of communication?
It's this notion of I think you're asking us if broadcasting is communication, right? Because I sort of see those types of things as more of a broadcast. Jennifer, I think your examples there are around really sort of broadcast style communication. I think it is. I think it is communication. I guess it's the process around that broadcasting or that blasting of content that converts it into communication, the kind of communication, I guess, that we've been talking about, because we would then listen and we would then test whether or not that has had the desired effect. And so by doing that, then you can convert the broadcast into something more strategic, perhaps.
So if we're able to determine that 50% of the employees did not complete their benefits enrollment by the deadline, we failed to communicate effectively.
But you could also say that the overarching objective is to make sure your employees are informed with what's important and what's going on in the company. So if you did a survey and the question was, do I think the company does a good job in telling me what's going on? And if you don't share that kind of information about benefits enrollment, or the parking lot is going to be closed, or we're going to be doing a furniture replacement, or we've got a company picnic, people want to be informed of things that might affect them, and they want to feel like the company cares enough to keep them informed. So I would say it's all part of an overarching strategy to maintain to stay engaged.
And I don't necessarily think you failed if 50% didn't respond, because you are affecting behavior by saying sign up by a certain time, or the company picnic is on this date. People make choices. You've given them the information, and the action is to go or not go, or to sign up or not sign up. They have made a decision. You've communicated, and their response in not signing up or going to the picnic or whatever it is. That's the action.
Although they may well come back and tell you, I did not see that message. I still hear that all the time. We'll go through 4 or 5 different communication channels, and then somebody will say, well, no one told me.
Exactly. I've heard that a million times. Yes.
There are examples of, for example, a company that's got a new healthcare program. It's going to cost more, and it's going to deliver less. The company's going to contribute less. Individually, it will cost more, and you get less. And yet the communicators have said, well, we got to tell everybody this is a great deal. This is really good for them, when it's not. And but we got to get people to enroll, and whether they feel it's a raw deal or not. So that's not a function of the communicator to make them like it. But if it's open enrollment and that's the option, well, you got to explain it at least. So.
Yeah.
Well, they don't necessarily have to like it, but they need to understand it. And I think that goes back to Jennifer's point about storytelling. You have to tell a compelling story on why this is happening. They may not like it, but if you explain it in such a way that they understand it, then they may not be as resistant in terms of accepting it.
Right. And honesty is, in the end, is the best approach.
For sure.
If something's a negative, you can't try to spin it into something that's a positive when it's not.
Right.
And a lot of communicators are asked to do that.
I'm going to chime in and remind us all that our own code of ethics calls on us all to use a previous line around our code of ethics to seek the truth and speak the truth. That's obviously on a broader scale, but when we were going back to the some of the more the hotter issues that are facing many organizations right now on a social issue front. I was again reminded that our code of ethics gives us some guidance about both speaking, being honest and protecting freedom of speech, but also to respect each other's cultural values and belief systems, and to communicate with respect around those things.
Jennifer, if somebody's not a member of IABC, where could they find the IABC Code of Ethics? Because that actually applies to any communicator, whether they're a member of IABC or not.
Yeah, and it's IABC has a code of ethics, but most other associations do too. IABC's is through IABC.com, and a quick Google search of IABC Code of Ethics will bring that up, and a code of conduct too. And if your organization or your community doesn't have one, it's a good model or a starting point for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple of minutes left, but I'd like to toss this out there. We've been talking about reporting, essentially serving as an internal journalist to let people know what's going on in the organization. This is a lot of the storytelling we do in organizations is about how our projects are going, what our people are doing, what business decisions have been made by leadership that falls under that label of reporting. Is that communication, or is that providing context that lays the groundwork for communication that may come up later? Because when you do engage employees in a two-way dialogue over something, if they don't know what's going on, their ability to engage effectively is going to be hampered.
I'm trying to find reasons for it not to be. I don't know why I'm doing that. So yes, I think is where my head is at. I think that is all part of it for sure.
And if we are reporting, the reporting needs to support the organization's goal, vision, mission, strategy, values, all of that. It needs to be aligned with that, so there's consistency in the messaging and the reporting. And I think that will help employees get it. But if it's just stray, the president did this or the vice president went somewhere, I mean, what does that have to do with the organization? You have to tie it back to who the or what the organization is. And then it makes more sense to me. And that is effective communication.
And we're going to have to make that the final word because we're out of time. I have only enough time to let everyone know that the next episode of Circle of Fellows will be on Thursday, August 18th at noon Eastern Time. The panel will feature Diane Gajewski, Martha Muzichka, and Cindy Schmieg, along with Neil returning. Looking forward to that, Neil. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Anna Willie for all of the incredible work she does in assembling these panels. It's all behind the scenes, but it wouldn't happen without her. So thanks to the panel. Thanks for everybody who was out there watching. And we'll see you next month.
All right. Take care. See you, everybody.
Thank you.